and welcome. I'm Ijoma Onyato. Tonight, Defense Headquarters launches full military operations to end attacks by armed bandits in Benue, Taraba, Nasarawa and Zamfara states. Army panel ends investigation into alleged collusion by troops in the attacks on Taraba villages, says former Army Chief General T.Y. Danjuma's claim was wrong. APC crisis in Imo State deepens as court stops the party's state congress scheduled for tomorrow. APC faction opposed to the state governor insists exercise will go on as planned. And many feared killed as Boeing 737 airliner with 104 passengers on board explodes after crashing in Havana, Cuba.
On business news tonight, federal government generates an increased sum of 269.79 billion naira as value-added tax in the first quarter of this year. On sports news, 16 schools including Ghana, Benin Republic confirmed their participation in the Channels International Kids Cup scheduled to begin on Monday, Surulere in Lagos.
And from Abuja, Supreme Court orders former Managing Director of defunct Intercontinental Bank, Erastus Akimbola, to face trial over 5 billion naira fraud.
We begin with the military's decision to launch yet another operation to counter the activities of armed bandits and militia groups operating in 4 states in Nigeria's northern region. The military exercise, which is tagged Operation Whirl, is to cover Benue, Nasarawa, Taraba and Zamfara states. The acting director of Defense Information, Brigadier General John Agim, disclosed this to journalists at the Tactical Air Command headquarters in Makurdi, the Benue state capital. He explains that the operation, which began on May the 8th, incorporates the military, the police and the Department of State Services. The force commander in charge of Operation Whirl, Major General Mutiu Yakini, gave residents the assurance that the operations cover both land and air surveillance.
Operation Whirl is a full-scale military operation in collaboration with other security agencies to completely restore law, order, peace and stability in the affected communities. In addition, Operation Whirl will ensure that all the people in the affected areas go about their lawful duties without fear of molestation from any porters. Since the commencement of this operation, I'm proud to state that it has recorded some successes in the above-mentioned states. After deployment of troops to the affected villages in Ayeluma and Uzi villages in Lugo, local government area of Benue State, there is a gradual return of villagers to their villages due to presence of security agencies within the local government areas. Available information indicated that about 400 residents of the village and about 200 residents of Ozi village have returned, out of about 1,500 and 1,000 residents, respectively, who fled the villages in January 2018 due to the attack of the suspected herdsmen. In Uye village of Toto local government area of Nasarawa state, troops engaged the militia and carried out a pursuit and discovered their camp and destroyed it.
Exercise Whirl seems to be the military's latest strategy to end the killings in the 4 troubled states. But residents of the affected states like Benue will need assurances that this new operation would surpass the record of Operation Catrace, which has over time generated mixed reactions. This next report takes a look at the perception of the people in the affected states on Operation Catrace as the military prepares for Whirl.
Why is the military starting a new operation in the north-central states of Benue, Taraba and Nasarawa, as well as Zamfara in the northwest? That's the big question being asked barely 3 months after the completion of the much-touted Operation Cat Race. The 45-day military exercise, which started on February the 15th, 2018 and ended on March the 31st, may not have entirely fulfilled the purpose for which it was set up, but the military insists it was a success.
During this period, a total of 183 criminals were arrested in exercise Ayamakatuma in Benue and Taraba State for various offenses. In Benue State, 147 herdsmen, 6 cultists, 5 wrestlers, and 6 armed bandits were arrested, while 15 were arrested in Taraba State. In one deep area of responsibility, a total of 13 bandits were arrested. All the arrested suspects have been handed over to the Nigerian police for further actions.
But his views are contrary to that of the people whose villages were ransacked, leaving properties destroyed, and those who lost their loved ones to the attacks. They allege that even while the Operation Cat Race was going on, pockets of attacks were carried out in the troubled state, particularly in Benue, under the watch of the military.
If it has the mandate to protect the people, and they really want to, they will do that. But without such a mandate, I think that there are mandates and there are mandates. This particular mandate, I don't think that is in the favor of the indigents of the state. I think it's in the favor of those who have the intention to come and take over and cleanse this state.
But it was not an exercise for cleansing. Rather, it is a military operation that probably requires more time, perhaps longer than the initial 45 days spent. The new exercise, codenamed Whirl is the military's latest strategy to end the clashes. What, however, remains to be seen is the tactics to be introduced. Will the exercise rekindle the confidence of the people in the military? And will the people have reasons to sleep again with their eyes closed? What will the military be doing differently?
Now let's take a closer look at this new operation. I'm now being joined on the News at 10 by a retired military officer, Colonel Francis Okosun. Thanks a lot for joining us on the News at 10.
Thank you, John.
There's a lot of back and forth about how successful military operations and exercises have been, even in the north, in the states that we're looking at right now. In your opinion, how do you think they've performed in these states?
How do I think exercises have gone or how operations have gone?
How have the military performed their duties, yes?
To the best of my appreciation, speaking professionally and given the factors at play, the military has done the best it can in this circumstance. If anybody has expected that terrorism or insurgency would have been brought down as quickly as people have touted, if anybody has thought that terrorism is something you defeat like that, then there's a misunderstanding of what terrorism is all about. Terrorism is not defeated that way. Not in Northern Ireland did you defeat terrorism. It ran for so long, and not until the Good Friday Agreement were they able to bring an end to the Northern Ireland crisis. Tupac Amaru in South America, the same. The ETA separatists in Basque region in Spain, same. So it's so all over the world. Terrorism is not a war like Nigerian civil war where you go capture towns and then you sign a peace treaty.
Okay, I know, but let's look at the issues that we have currently on ground. Let's just take a look at Cat Race itself. Lives were being lost at the time, and even with the presence of the military there, up to the day they even left, you found that that farmer-herders clash was still on.
Yes.
Why is that? And one of the reasons people on the ground, one of the things those who were on the ground said at the time was that it was an exercise, it was not an operation.
Yes.
Why an exercise?
Well, the decision to hold an exercise as against launch an operation is that for a higher headquarters to determine. It's more of a political decision. It's not what I can sit down here and determine.
It was a political decision?
Hold 1 second, hold 1 second. What I'm saying is, if you determine to hold an exercise, it will be part of a programmed event. You have a cycle, training cycle, where you have exercises, and these exercises are carried out. Now you can decide to carry out an exercise in any given area if that exercise will be relevant to that area.
The question is, the exercise that was carried out in Benue at the time under Cateris, was that an effective exercise to have been sent there at that time?
Okay.
Or should it have been an operation? That is the question.
Can I say this? When you carry out an exercise, it is a training maneuver. You do not deploy troops. It's like you are practicing before an actual competition.
People were dying at that time, they were practicing.
You asked a question, and I'm telling you the difference between an exercise and an operation is that in operation, you maneuver troops against an enemy. In an exercise, you do not maneuver troops against an enemy. It's war gaming. You have war gaming where you have controlled enemies, you have umpires, you have observers, and so on and so forth. So we have to have an understanding of what an exercise means, and then draw a distinction between an exercise and an operation. Now what you're having today, what the Defense Headquarters has talked about today, is an operation. That is clearly different. The one you have in the northeast, Lafiadole, is an operation. And you have troops maneuvering against enemy locations or enemy positions, and there are firefights. The exercise you're talking about, there were no firefights. So if there are no firefights, there was no way you're going to fight.
Okay, I'm sorry to have to belabor the issue, but if you say that there were no firefights, we know how many lives were lost at that time, and the amount of bloodshed that was, that happened around that time. And you're saying that it was fine, perhaps...
No, I have not said it was fine. You asked me to distinguish between an exercise and an operation.
Yes,
and I tried
so
to
my
do that.
Question, should that not have been an operation?
Well, and I'm saying, who determines where to launch an operation?
That's what I'm asking you.
Yeah, it's not I who determine. It's someone else or some other authority that determines. Some level of authority determines. So the level of authority that determines would be either the federal government, in this instance, or, well, you should also understand that no army commander will launch an operation without a directive. There has to be a directive before an operation can be launched.
Okay,
and directives are sent from Defense Headquarters level, coming from the Minister of Defense, I imagine taking instructions to Commander-in-Chief all the way down.
The reasons we ask the questions we ask is for lessons to be learned. Because even when you talk to people who are on the ground, they didn't feel any safer even while catch race was happening. But let's look at Whirl stroke, and that's what we have right now. It's being called a full-scale military operation.
It is.
What's going to be done differently now? And do you think we have the assurances that this crisis is going to come to an end now that we have a full-scale military operation?
All right. It's ambitious to sit in a studio like this and make projections or prognosis. See, this exercise, the way I understand it, this operation, the way I understand it, is a hybrid that involves the armed forces, the police, Department of State Services, I think elements of the civil defense. It is a simultaneous exercise as against a sequential one as we had before. Simultaneous in the sense that you have troops in firm bases. Firm bases deploying a lot of intelligence assets so that you can determine where enemy, well, these marauders are, isolate them and decisively snuff them out. If you do that, that will be simultaneously. As it is, I hear they've deployed in certain local governments across the states, less Zamfara. So when you have such things and you have air component, it should be a much better endeavor.
All right, thank you so much. Retired military officer Colonel Francis Okosun, for sharing your thoughts on the news of 10 tonight.
Thank you so much.
And in part two, after the break, Anglican Primate Most Reverend Nicholas Oko asked federal government to double its efforts to curb rising wave of violence in Nigeria. That's in a moment. Please stay with us.